Hey everyone, this is EG7, and in this video I want to talk about the EG7 acquisition of Daybreak Games and thus Standing Stone Games, who runs the Lord of the Rings Online, and my thoughts on what that basically means for LOTRO, but also I'm going to be putting in the recent news of the Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO being cancelled. And I think that brings just some interesting things to explore, and honestly it helped motivate me actually make this video. This is something I've been wanting to do to explain my skepticism if anything will actually change with our current MMO, LOTRO. So first off, I should point out the Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO, it never really excited me, even though I do play LOTRO, which is a kind of old actually MMO at this point. So my first reaction when I heard the Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO was canceled, I was just like, whatever. After thinking about it a little bit more, I do think it may have some implications with LOTRO, and I will be saving that towards the end of this video for the second half, because first I do think we need to cover the EG7 acquisition of SSG. So all of the information from EG7 and EG7 comes from the investors presentation, where they had a few slides on LOTRO, but the main one of interest in this video that I want to talk about is where they talked about growth opportunities and had a section on LOTRO upgrade for 2022. And in that it said planning visual and technical updates for LOTRO for PC and next-gen consoles to capitalize on Amazon's large investment of $500 million in the Lord of the Rings TV series. So all of that sounds great, right? Well, ever since that news came out, I'm actually a bit pessimistic of anything from that actually happening. So the investors presentation, first of all, was made to make the deal, the acquisition of Daybreak Games, actually look appealing to shareholders and all that sort of stuff. They just wanted to pump the game up and make it sound super exciting, something people would want to invest in. So kind of the reality of what actually happens, I'm not sure will line up with what they share in the presentation to, again, appease shareholders and that type of stuff. But also, Standing Stone actually initially said nothing will change with the development of LOTRO. That's the same thing they said when they switched from Turbine to Standing Stone Games, when they were taken away from Turbine and acquired by Daybreak Games in the first place. But they said basically the exact same thing, that the development of LOTRO will not change with that acquisition. And because they are the ones actually working on the game, that makes me think that probably LOTRO will just continue to run its course as it is planned. Now, I will talk about that in a moment, but to go on more about the graphical upgrade and porting it to next-gen consoles, that is stuff that would take tons of work and a huge investment to do both of those, do a big gameplay overhaul so it could actually work on next-gen consoles, and do a graphics overhaul. So it almost to me actually feels like recreating LOTRO as a new modern MMO from the ground up is more realistic than updating the current LOTRO game that we have now, and that is something that I am really not sure the EG7 Standing Stone Games and all that sort of stuff, it would just be feasible or possible. But that's really the idea I'm getting from a graphics overhaul and doing enough of a gameplay change to port it to console. That's a lot of stuff, and a lot of things would need to change for that to actually work. But going on those individual topics with the graphics overhaul, that of course I think would be a great addition to LOTRO that many players and even many people not yet playing would probably like the graphics to be updated. So I actually see in comments on my videos a lot where people say they like the current style of the graphics, but they also say that the graphics look bad or outdated and don't really like them. And to me, ideally a graphics overhaul would actually not change too much the style of the graphics. Importantly, I would love for it to keep the same style, but just improve the quality of the overall graphics would be a nice thing. But there are some extra issues than just improving the graphics. First of all, there are issues with performance with LOTRO right now, and if they update the graphics, perhaps that could just make performance issues even worse. So they would need to make LOTRO a little bit more optimized and make it perform better, I think, before even thinking about doing a graphics overhaul. To me, at least, from my perspective, that would be the first step, given I am not a developer. I don't know exactly what goes into all of this, but that is what I get should be the idea of the first step, to improve performance so we can enjoy the new graphics. But right now, LOTRO, for people that don't know, is a CPU-intensive game and has no multi-threading, so you have to rely on a single CPU core or thread, and your performance is really based on your single core CPU speed. And on top of that, LOTRO actually very rarely utilizes the full GPU. I have an old GPU, and it still often only sticks at like 20%. Sometimes there are some locations where the GPU usage will actually go up, but it just doesn't really fully utilize the power of the GPU as well. It's very CPU intensive. And there's also this odd thing, I don't know if it's really related too much to the graphics, but the game is really dependent on having fast hard drive speeds, and I think that's because of your like loading stuff in the game from the files and all that. So having a solid state drive is actually very beneficial to LOTRO performance, oddly enough. That's one of the bigger things and maybe more minor things in a way that you could actually upgrade, cheaper things you could upgrade to improve your LOTRO performance. But anyway, moving on from the graphics overhaul, I just think that those are some concerns going on with that, especially with performance. But moving on from that, for the console update, I think this is something that many current players would actually probably not like, and I am in the category. So one major reason I love LOTRO is it is a classic style, I guess that's like old school MMO, and it has tab targeting. Your character has lots of skills to use, you have the skill bars, all that sort of stuff. That I really enjoy that compared to new MMOs, especially like new MMOs that are adaptable to consoles. So I'm not sure actually how much the current community would like LOTRO gameplay if it were changed enough to be more towards like the common modern style, I guess, nowadays, where it could again be adaptable to consoles. And it's something that I do know I personally would not like. And overall, I actually think when thinking about this and how loyal the LOTRO player base is, even that was actually shared in the EG7 presentation, that was like a big part, how loyal the player base was for LOTRO. And I think even Dungeons & Dragons Online, the other Standing Stone game. But anyway, I don't think this loyal player base would take it all that well. A lot of us enjoy the classic MMORPG style. Maybe not everybody that plays does, and maybe some people would enjoy a newer modern MMO take, but again, I think that is more of a different game and not really change LOTRO, the game we have now, to be that different and have a kind of like a new game, which I would also doubt is happening, and that's even the Lord of the Rings MMO, of course, has been canceled, the one from Amazon. So that's just like extra fuel for my skepticism on anything like that happening. But this is, yeah, on the note of the Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO, that's actually one of the reasons that I have never been able to get excited about it, because I've just expected it to be like that modern MMO that I personally do not enjoy that type of style. But we will actually get more on that later, of course. And just overall, with both the console part and the graphics overhaul, it's just not really getting my hopes up that anything major will happen with all this. It is something I will, of course, keep invested interest in, but just don't really have much hope right now. Overall, very pessimistic feeling, which probably doesn't sound good, but that is the state of me right now with that. One more thing I do want to point out is that Severlin, who is the executive producer for LOTRO, they did a Q&A recently on April 16th, I believe, and actually this was a huge surprise to me, but they actually did comment on the EG7 acquisition when that question came up. Actually, it kept coming up because they have not really commented on it much besides saying the development of LOTRO won't change. So again, the executive producer did comment on that, and they of course did not share many specifics but again, to my surprise, they acknowledged the questions and said that there are a lot of different things going on and a lot of possibilities. In general, I will say Severlin sounded very excited about EG7 and the possibilities there, and perhaps the ongoing work they're doing with them. And he even said the company was very excited about LOTRO as well, which that sounds great actually, especially compared to basically not hearing anything about any of the developers of LOTRO, and more specifically actually their parent companies like that at all before. So having any information on that was very nice, and Severlin again did sound very excited about the possibilities going on there. Now, he also did talk about what may need to go into a graphics overhaul, and that's where the excitement turned more into concern to me. And basically, they would have to redo every texture in the game, every piece of art, and maybe even convert things from they usually do paintings, it sounds like, for a lot of things. They would have to convert that to vector graphics, and vector graphics, for anybody unfamiliar, is a scalable like graphics format where you basically get the same quality zoomed way in as you do way out, so things can look sharper and such things like that. I'm not really sure how vector graphics would be implemented into the game, if they would work like that if they're actually in a game. But anyway, that is too much off topic for what we are getting to right now. I just think perhaps it could just be sharper in the game. Basically, that is the type of stuff that would go into a graphics overhaul, and that's just another reason for me to wonder if anything major will happen or actually change, because that is just a lot. And I think if anything will change, it may be in the form of a minor graphics adjustment, and they just call that a graphics overhaul to say they did it, and that is more so what I expect right now to actually happen. But Also, as we have already touched on, they would have to optimize LOTRO and improve performance, because right now, even on some of the best hardware, it has some issues, and I think they would really need to address and even prioritize getting that done before even thinking about doing the graphics overhaul again. And this is something that I am sure, or at least really hope, the people working on LOTRO and potentially working on any potential graphics overhaul are aware of, and getting that done and prioritize, just have it as a high priority basically. So yeah, with that, overall my feelings on all this is I just am left skeptical, as y'all can probably tell, if anything will change with LOTRO in regards to the acquisition. But where this gets really extra interesting, and maybe even does get my hopes up a little bit, is both the Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO being cancelled and thinking more about the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series. First, with the new MMO, I will just refer to it as that from here on out, but I think there are two main ways to think about it. First is that because LOTRO is currently the only Lord of the Rings MMORPG, that means people interested in the Lord of the Rings franchise and want to have an MMO to play of that game, or of that franchise rather, they will now have LOTRO as essentially the only option, so that will help drive more players to the game than if there was a new MMO coming out to compete with LOTRO. But that competition is exactly the second part of this. Without competition, will there be anything to drive LOTRO to actually change? Will EG7 have like enough reason to fund all the potentially great changes in graphics overhauls and that sort of stuff, if there is no competition to worry about in the first place? So in general, competition is just what drives a lot of that type of stuff, and I don't have an answer to these questions, unfortunately, but I think it will be very interesting for LOTRO's future and something definitely worth following. So on the topic of the cancellation of the new MMO, actually, that's already something I mentioned I was never really excited about, because there are kind of three major reasons, actually. One is it was likely going to be a more modern MMO format, which I don't really personally find that format to be fun. Second, I suspected it may end up similar to New World, and while I have not been following that game all that much, the little I have seen from it has sparked like very little interest for me. And finally, three, for something so far from becoming an actual reality, it wouldn't have been good for me to like think and get super excited and hyped up about this game because it was so far from reality, and rather I prefer to focus on things I do have now and like what I enjoy now with a game like LOTRO, as the game you'll see in the background, of course. That's what I prefer to focus on, so I just don't like to get excited about potential things in the future that are so far off when I have something right now that I can enjoy, and just focus on my enjoyment with that. So for me, overall, it's just not the biggest loss that the game is being canceled, but what I understand is there are a lot of people that are actually more invested and more interested in this than I was. So it seems that most people actually that have been invested and interested are actually happy that it has been canceled, of all things, with that. And again, concerning like the regards with LOTRO with this, if it will ultimately be a good or bad thing for the game, I think this is something that does make me a little bit more hopeful, maybe, for LOTRO's future. And while I think there are many things that actually make LOTRO exciting for 2021 before we're even getting to that, probably before we're getting into any sort of investment from EG7 actually making it down into the game, there are a lot of things coming this year, but I think 2022 could potentially be way more exciting depending what exactly happens and all the stuff going on that I've talked about in this video, and especially if they can do something more than like a minor graphics update, or maybe bring better optimization and performance and all that good type of stuff that I know many players would like. But next, I do want to summarize my thoughts on the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series in regards to LOTRO, of course, not the actual show. But I think this will drive interest in the game, and as EG7 shared in their presentation, I do think it would be a good idea to capitalize on that interest by investing into LOTRO, so it is more appealing of a game to new or even returning players. I think there are quite a few things that need to change though with LOTRO before we get a big flashy graphics overhaul and like next gen consoles port, as much as I might dislike the latter there, the console port. I think these changes that I will list will actually need to be implemented for any influx of players to actually take well to the game. So the first is a little bit of a nicer free-to-play model. That would of course be nice to help people who start out wanting a free-to-play MMO, but actually the bigger thing I think here is LOTRO needs to be more friendly to people who do pay. Currently you have to buy all the old expansions even if you pay a subscription, and I just personally think with the monetization style and the stuff going on there and how you have to buy content and all the confusion there, I think personally it would be a lot easier if the old expansions were just included with VIP and then they had new expansions, and I feel right now a lot of people think the game is not worth their money ultimately when they run into a lot of these issues compared to other MMOs and other competing MMOs actually that have this type of stuff, where it's a lot easier for you to pay and actually get the content. And then the second big thing I think LOTRO needs is simply better servers. The huge influx of players actually in spring 2020 saw poor server performance, especially in the summer of 2020, and it's something that would drive players away, and I think it did drive many players away because they just lagged too much to actually enjoy the game, actually play the game. And I think cross-server integration as another topic would be something that would help the world actually seem way more lively for new players and even current players, and of course would be very nice. That was something that I really think they could work on and would be very helpful for the game. It's something a lot of other games are starting to have now, where your limitations of playing with people is not based on your current server. I really do think that's something that would help. But moving on, the third thing I think LOTRO really needs is, talked about this a ton in this video already, better performance and optimization, including multi-threading as a big thing, of course. So right now, as we mentioned, LOTRO is limited to a single CPU thread and at the same time is very CPU intensive. So at some points the FPS lag is just kind of like a feature of this game almost at this point, and this is especially true in certain places like Minas Tirith, where there are tons of objects, tons of textures, and all that sort of stuff. And I will say, actually, the 64-bit client in late 2019, that helps a lot with performance, especially it lessened crashes and all the good stuff like that, where it is better. So maybe just a few more things like turning on, I don't know, just turning on CPU multi-threading, but making that a thing for the game, a reality for the game. Things like that along those lines would be great for LOTRO, and I think would be helpful for the new players, potential new players coming. And those are actually just the three very major things that I think actually need to change to help LOTRO be a more appealing game to newcomers and just anybody else who is actually interested in it due to the Lord of the Rings TV series or whatever there. And after that is done, that is when I feel like they can focus on the graphics overhaul or any sort of gameplay updates they want to do. Again, as much as I might personally dislike the latter, that could be a reality for the game in the future. But now that we have covered all of the topics, and I do want to summarize a lot of the stuff going on here, even though I am usually optimistic about a lot of things, I am just not sure if LOTRO will actually change. I'm mainly just not getting my hopes up and letting things run the course and kind of going with the flow as the next couple of years unfold. The EG7 acquisition, I think, will not hurt LOTRO by any means, so don't get me wrong on that. I just think there is a lot of uncertainty if they will actually invest into the game, and then if they do invest into the game, what SSG decides to do with that as the big uncertainty for LOTRO's future. But I also think the Amazon Lord of the Rings TV series will drive interest in the franchise, of course, and even produce interest in a Lord of the Rings MMO, and that would actually cause a boost of activity in the only Lord of the Rings MMO, LOTRO. So this activity boost may or may not be long lasting, and I think that really depends on how the game is received by these players, of course, and there are a few changes that I do think need to be implemented for the majority of those players to stick around. And finally, I think the cancellation of the new Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO has both positive and negative implications for LOTRO. Positively, any interest in that game may be redirected to LOTRO, but also the potential competition provided by another MMO, another Lord of the Rings MMO specifically, may have given SSG and their parent companies the proper kick to work on changing the game for the better. So I wish I did have more answers for you all overall in this video, but again, I am just along for the ride, and I will be sitting here continuing to make videos as things do unfold, and hopefully we will see some exciting things and good things coming to LOTRO in the future. But again, I'm just letting it run its course and following along. But I am interested, if you all please do comment your thoughts. I'm really interested on what people have to think about the EG7 acquisition, the Amazon Lord of the Rings stuff, and all that. So I would appreciate that. Also with this video, I do hope you all enjoyed it and maybe learned something useful. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content. And thanks for watching, everyone.